So hello again. Today we've got another Zoom interview. This time I've got a special guest and somebody who's near and dear to me. I'll let her go ahead and introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hankins. I'm the Associate Artistic Director at Triad Stage in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm an actor, director, and teacher.
Very, very cool. So you have a really awesome thing that you've done, and I'm sure there's been quite a journey to get where you are. So how did you get where you are?
Well, I started out in my career as an actor and a stage manager, and did a couple of internships right out of undergrad, and one of which was with Orlando Shakespeare Theater. And then I trained at Shakespeare and Company, and then I started sort of getting more and more acting credits and realized that I was really more interested in acting than I was into stage management, so focused there. Was hired to be an actor and a teacher at Orlando Shakespeare Theater as an associate artist was the name of my title. And I ran their internship program for about 6 years. So I was the internship program coordinator, as well as a director during the summers for a program called The Young Company, which I directed for a couple of years. And then, I was hungry for more training and more professional experiences, and sort of had played, all of the roles already at the Shakespeare Festival, because, plays come back around. So I started out my first year there playing Ophelia in Hamlet, and Hamlet was scheduled for the next season. I was like, well, who am I going to play this time? Because
Yeah.
I still am the type of Ophelia, but I already did it at this theater. So I moved to New York and pursued my career there for about 8 years, and was directing and performing professionally. And then for my day job, I was teaching anything from K to college, various programs. And then I decided that I wanted to, I was the artistic director of a small theater company in Brooklyn. And I decided that I wanted to kind of deepen my ability to talk about my aesthetic, my directing aesthetic, and what I really believed in as an artist. And so I decided to go back to grad school for directing, with the ultimate goal of being an artistic director at a major regional theater someday. Went back to grad school. I got my master's in fine arts in directing at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And as part of that program, I had the opportunity to assist and work at Triad Stage, a professional regional theater here in Greensboro, North Carolina, the largest regional theater in the midsection of North Carolina. And after I graduated, the associate artistic director who had been there before, he moved on, and I was hired to take his place, and now get the opportunity to run the theater company, serve as the local casting director. I've performed in our productions. I direct our production of Christmas Carol every year, and then I get to direct a couple of other things. And then in addition to that, I also adjunct at several of the universities locally. So it was a long journey to get here, but I think one of the things that I always emphasize for folks is that, you don't have to be one thing. And if I had only convinced myself that I was just a stage manager, or I was just an actor, or I was just a teacher, that I wouldn't have had as much fun or had the opportunities that I've gotten in my career. So being a hyphenate or hybrid sometimes can be frustrating, because you're like, what do I want to pursue right now? You know what I mean? Like, what do I want to do now versus what do I want to do, 5 years from now? Should I go for this directing gig? Should I go for this acting gig? Do what's in your heart, because there's time. I've realized now that there's a lot of time in this career. We've talked about that, Keith.
Yep.
Yep. That actually, there's no pressure to succeed early. Mm-mm. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I think that's something, it's good to keep hearing this, because we've had 2 other interviews before this from actually people who I knew in high school, who went off to perform on Broadway and do film and television out in LA. Um,
Right.
and everybody's had different journeys to get where they are. So I think that the time is one of those things that you just don't really know, and
You
it's
don't
just
really know.
yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to go to undergrad for theater, and if I don't get into the specific program, my career is over. I'll never have a career. Or they get out of undergrad and they're like, oh, well, I have to go to grad school, or I have to book this particular job right away, or else I'm not a real actor. I'm not a real theater artist. And that's all lies. That's all lies. I went to a small private liberal arts school that was not a theater conservatory by any stretch of the imagination. I wasn't even a theater major until after I got to the end of my sophomore year. And then I immediately went to Germany to study abroad for my junior year. So, I feel like I thought I was going to be an English major for years. I feel like giving oneself time and giving oneself permission is really important.
Yeah, for sure. Well, awesome. Definitely. So I think one of the things that I want to clarify for my students, because when I
Yes.
prefaced this for them, I told them that you were an actor and a director, and you had taught theater. Have you ever worked in a public school system?
As a official public schools teacher, nope. I have only worked as a contract employee
Okay.
from different theater companies that send me into schools to work as a resident teaching artist or as a teaching artist at those places, or have worked at camps, sleepaway camps, residency camps, those sort of things, or I've worked at an after-school program. I have never been a true public school teacher or private school teacher.
Yeah.
Neither one, but I have taught high school students extensively. I was the director of the Young Company, which was a program that still exists that Keith teaches for.
Yep.
At Orlando Shakespeare Theater. At the time, it was a month-long intensive camp for teens, or not really a camp, a program for teens that is invested in training young artists and developing them not only as actors, but as human beings, and kind of really focusing on the self and identity and who I am and how I make my craft versus, we're going to do a play. There is a play as part of that. Because it's helpful to put your training into practice, and really thinking about the play that we were working on as a vehicle for learning rather than as a production that we were trying to do. And so we would specifically craft the classes that we would take around the production that we were doing, but they would also serve the students as training. So when we were doing Taming the Shrew, which Keith was in, when we were doing Taming the Shrew, we took classes in commedia and in comedy and in clown in order to support that work. Just as when we were doing Richard III, we were doing fight choreography and rhetoric and those sort of things to support the work. But it's one of the greatest experiences of my life was to be the director of the Young Company. I'll be honest.
It's a really, really special program, and I don't just say that because we're both involved with it, but I think just it has been. We had the reunion a couple of years ago that was really, really awesome to see because the program's been running for
20 years,
20 plus years at this point now.
23, something like that, right?
Yeah. And it was quite funny because, as you said, you directed me in Taming of the Shrew, and I went on as the assistant director for them. And the first show I worked on with them was Taming the Shrew. So, yet again, theaters come back around. But we're working on Othello this summer. It's all going to be online, which we had made the choice to do Othello, and then we had some interesting production meetings about what is this going to be for us doing a play so much about human interaction in a time when we're all quarantined.
Right.
We're excited about that.
Physical action, like that play specifically engages with a lot of violence,
Yeah.
and you know, and how do you deal with that? But yeah, I think that that's pretty exciting.
So we're gonna have some fun with that going forward. But I wanna take some time and ask you some of these questions that my
Great.
students have for you. Um, some very very good ones. One of the first ones that I have here that I'm interested in is what was the favorite job you have done and why?
Oh, like theater job?
It
Or
is so these questions I have prefaced them asking them about what you've done, and
right.
knowing that you've done all of those things. That is the general framework of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think being the director of the Young Company will always be sort of one of my favorite theatrical and artistic experiences of my life. And I think it really gave me the confidence, because I didn't see myself as a director necessarily until I was working with the Young Company, and I was able to play and develop productions with a very specific aesthetic that I now recognize as something that is foundational for myself. And so that was a really incredible experience, and especially because we've all stayed in touch. You know, I think of myself as like every Young Company member's big sister that that I taught, because our relationship was so close. But beyond that, I'd say like one acting experience that was really seminal for me was when I was training at Shakespeare and Company, I did a production of Henry VI, and it was
Love
parts
that
1, 2, and
show.
3, and I played Queen Margaret, and she is like one of the coolest, baddest, fiercest women in the Shakespeare canon, and so I had an opportunity to play her for her entire life cycle. So as a young woman, sort of falling in love, finding independence, who she is, all the way through becoming like a political genius and machinator, and then towards the end of her life, losing her child, which was a really powerful thing. And I just feel like that particular production was a breakthrough for me as an actor, and kind of changed who I was and how I approached the work. Another big one for me would have to be, this is for as a director. I was going to say another one as an actor, but I should do a director one. I just recently directed White Lightning, which is a production. It was its second production. It had premiered at Alabama Shakespeare Festival. We did it at Triad Stage. It was a replacement of a different production that our board decided that they wanted us to pursue something else. And I am a woman from Appalachia, from the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia, and talking about oneself as a Southern artist is not something that I would have ever done in my entire life until I came to Triad Stage, where Southern voice is one of our core values. And so we're trying to always talk about the issues in our community. And so we are a theater company producing in the South. And so what are the works, what are the plays, what are the ideas, what are the community thoughts that are not necessarily expressed in the plays that we get from New York? You know, that about New York life, about I feel like we get really New York centric. It's all like, oh, it's a living room play set on the Lower East Side, and all of these sort of things. And that doesn't necessarily speak to the people in our community. And so what are the plays that we're doing? So we produce a lot of productions that are about modern Southern life. And so the complexities of race relationships, the complexities of kind of pulling down statues, how do different people feel about that, politics within the South. But I got to direct this particular play called White Lightning, which was about moonshine runners who started, racing for NASCAR in the very early days of NASCAR in the 1940s. And the secret of my life is that my father used to take me to NASCAR races. And the other secret of my life is that my family used to run moonshine. So, it was all of this kind of stuff from my past that I never thought I would get to do a play about. And I really understood these people, and the cast that we got was really incredibly special. And so those two, I would say, like, that production was something that really helped me identify what I can bring that somebody else can't necessarily bring to a work. And that's a really rich understanding of a variety of different communities because I've lived all over the country.
Yeah. That's really cool. Thank you. That's
a fun
really
show
nice.
too. It was good.
Nice. So I've got another question here from one of my students. How is it different working with students compared to working with other actors in a professional setting?
Oh, well, that's a great question because at Triad Stage, we have a university partnership with a couple of universities. And so we have students that are in our productions. And so I was just before COVID-19 took us down and put us on hiatus, I was directing Pride and Prejudice, a new adaptation by Kate Hamill, which has 8 actors playing all of the characters. And 3 of those actors were students. One BFA student from University of North Carolina, Greensboro, one MFA student from that program, and she was getting her thesis role on this production, and then a BFA student from North Carolina A&T, which is a historically Black university. And the thing that I always treat everyone the same in the rehearsal room. I just modify my language. So if one of the student actors is having difficulty with a particular moment, we break it down with action. You know, I talk about action, I talk about objective, I talk about backstory, I talk about obstacle, whatever that might be, but I stay focused on action because that's the building blocks that we all have in common. We have that language in common, and oftentimes younger actors, they go with impulse, they go with like, oh, this is how I feel versus what am I doing? Mm-hmm. And so I always make sure to break it down to that. But I also work with, because I do our production of A Christmas Carol every year, I work with children. I work with 7 children every Christmas time. 7 children, 5 students, and then the rest of the company are professionals. And, you know, it's just that thing of what does this actor need to get someplace in the rehearsal room? What do I do? And so I'm constantly shifting. My assistant directors always tell me, because I'm not very conscious of myself when I'm directing, I'm just trying, because I'm focused on my action of getting the play done. You know what I mean? But my assistant directors tell me that I change my language and accommodate the needs of the actor in order to get the play where it needs to go. And I think that that's something that you really have to be incredibly emotionally aware of other people and be able to read them, which is why this framework of the Zoom is so difficult, because we can't see the full body, we can't see the full expression. And so that kind of emotional and physical awareness and being able to feel what somebody's impulse is incredibly valuable. And so I just changed my language to be specific or tell the actor what they need to hear in a particular way so they go a certain direction. The guy that's playing Darcy in Pride and Prejudice is very analytical, like super duper analytical. And he always wants to know what it looks like from the outside. You know what I mean? And so I promised him, actually, before we didn't get to tech because we were canceled, but postponed. But I told him, he's like, how do you see this in your mind? Like, what's the picture? I was like, I don't know that I necessarily have a picture. And he's like, okay, well, what is the goal? You know what I mean? Like, he's very like that. And I accommodate that. So when we were talking about tech, I was like, David, if you want to step out and watch the moment with the lights and the sound without you there, so you know how you're fitting into this puzzle piece, I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I was like, if you want to do that, that's great. And he was like, great, because then I feel like I can support your vision more thoroughly because I know what you're looking at. And I was like, that's not the way I usually work.
No, but that's cool.
But it's the way it needed to happen, you know?
For sure.
Great. He's really smart.
Another question from one of my students that I think is going to be fun and could potentially reveal things. Were your theater kids stereotypical, and what was your favorite thing about your students?
Were my theater kids stereotypical? Only in the way that, like, all theater kids are very individual.
Yes. Okay.
Are the like more themselves? I don't know.
All right. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think theater training trains you to accept yourself as, because this is my instrument. This is all I got. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And so I think there's a little bit more self-acceptance once we do theater training. But were my theater kids stereotypical? They were all very precious to me. Yeah, and I feel like I don't know, this is just me talking,
Yeah.
but I feel like I love to encourage individuality in my students, and that they pursue their ultimate geekdom. Like whatever they geek about, like go for it, man. Like I'm a huge Harry Potter geek. It's always have been. Like that's my fandom. Like so, go for your fandom, whatever your fandom is, or whatever you like to do, or whether gets you excited, go for it. I don't know. What was the other part of that question? Stereotypical.
Just what was your favorite thing about your students? But I think you kind of answered that.
Okay, good. I adored them. And those students that I have now, I still adore. I had a really great directing class last fall. And I think it's because everybody brought something to the table and really I don't know, had opinions. And yeah, it's fun.
So this is another good question, especially considering you said you're working as a casting director now. How do you know someone is a right fit for a certain role?
Well, that's a great question. I don't look at type. I'm not a big fan of what people call typecasting or anything like that. I think it's all about energy. And I'm actually really, to pat myself on the back, which I never do, which is something I'm working on.
Yeah.
Something I'm working on, is that I'm really good at casting. And I think that's because I really focus on the energy of the character, what the character needs, what kind of person they are, what kind of change do they bring to the room, and then what does the actor bring. And I am also really good at seeing potential. And I think whether an actor is perfect for a role or not, there's a willingness to work. There's a curiosity about the world or the character, and there's a kind of a fearlessness. You have to be willing to throw yourself into a role. And I think fear and lack of curiosity are the two things that stop actors from really getting where they could potentially go.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
And for academic casting, which you as a teacher also struggle with, the thing that we're looking for in the academy, in training programs, is we're looking for an opportunity to stretch you. And you might not think you need that stretch, but you do. You might not think you need that stretch, but you wouldn't believe how stressed out your teachers get about your casting and about whether they're providing you with the best possible stretch for you that's going to stretch you but not break you, and also not
the last two are the most commonly asked questions that I have from my students, so I've kind of been going over them with everybody I talk to.
Cool.
So how do you deal with the struggle of memorization?
Oh, I used to be great at memorizing lines. Now I am terrible. So the other acting job that I thought about saying for the earlier one, what job did you really like, was this production of The Passion of Teresa Ray King that we did here at Triad Stage, where I played a cop kind of trying to figure out a murder. And the play opened with 8-page monologue. Yeah, all me, just boom. And we had a lot of details. And then throughout the play, there were page-long monologues. And I was terrified because if it's verse, if it's Shakespeare, I can memorize it more quickly because it's got a rhythm to it. It's got a little thing going on it. But if it's just straight up contemporary writing, Lord. And the director kept changing, the playwright / director kept changing the lines throughout the entire rehearsal process. And I got a new monologue on opening night. And that play changed how I felt about myself as a person that memorized. I was like, actually, I'm really great at it. I just need to have faith in myself. Ways to memorize. When I'm washing the dishes, when I'm walking, I like to move when I'm memorizing because I feel like it helps viscerally because I'm a visceral learner to get into my body. This is a really silly one that I've done ever since I was in college. I tape it outside of the shower. I like a nice long shower. So I tape it outside of the shower and I run the lines. And then while I'm washing my hair, I like peek out. Oh, yeah, I got it right. You know what I mean? So those things are all really helpful. I don't advise memorizing when you're driving because I've done that before and that was not safe for me or anyone else.
Right. Good to know. Good advice.
Safety
And then
first, guys.
the other question is, do you still get nerves and anxiety? And how do you deal with that? Getting ready for performances or being on the other side of a table for a rehearsal or an audition? And then what happens if something goes wrong? What do you do?
Great questions. I never suffered from stage fright until my final production during my undergrad. I was the stage manager in our town. This is terrible, but like I had an ex-boyfriend that was in the cast, and the whole play started with me center and the whole cast around. And during our final dress rehearsal, I went up and he started laughing. And he had like a couple of bros from his fraternity in the show as well. And so like it became like something in my head and it panicked me. And that was the first time I ever had to experience stage fright. And what a jerk, right? What a jerk. Not very nice. We had an ugly breakup. So during that, I had to actually find ways to get through it, especially at the top of the show, because that character never stops talking.
Nope, we did Our Town. That was our fall play this year. So my students are familiar with it.
Kudos to that stage manager for memorizing all those lines. But so I listen to a watch sometimes, the tick of a watch, because that gets me outside of the whirl of thoughts in my head and makes me think here. I focus on, especially when I was auditioning in New York, I was always afraid that I would forget my first line, sort of because of this sort of stage frighty thing. So I would focus on picturing the room that I would be talking to the person in, not picturing the audition room, because I already knew the audition room because there's only, so many of them in New York. You know what they look like. And I would picture the room and my action. I would think about my action. What do I want from this person? And that really helps me for auditions, is really focusing on what I want from the other character versus on what the things are in my head. And then I always go down to the theater like 5 minutes before go as an actor, so that I can hear the audience and I can breathe. And I do a lot of breath work. As a director, I'm lucky because like there's only a couple of days that people are looking at me.
Yep.
Just that first day of rehearsal, during table work, and then the first day that we start staging. And I'm comforted in that one of my favorite female directors, Anne Bogart, talks often about how the first day of staging is terrifying for her, and she's been working for 40 years. And she just, she just leans into, I don't have to have answers. We're just here to play.
Yep.
And really focusing on just here to play. What's helped me as an artist get, like, if something goes wrong, focusing in on action, focusing on what I want for my partner. But the biggest thing that's ever helped me is clown training, because clowns are completely alone on stage. It's just them and the audience, and they can look at the audience and the audience looks at them, and it's acknowledged that the audience is there. And doing clown training really forces an actor to go deep into what their fear is on stage. And so I became sort of more fearless once I had clown training, because I had already faced everything that was scary.
Yep.
And had like fallen apart and cried and gotten really anxious or whatever. But like clown training is really confronts you with yourself. And I highly suggest it for everyone. But since then, if things go wrong on stage, we move through it.
Yep.
You're just like, oh, well.
Cool. Let keep going.
Just
Very,
keep
very cool. So, thank you so much for talking to us. If there's anything that you want my students to know or look at, if there
going.
any online classes or anything that Triad is doing coming up, or do you have any projects or anything you want to tell them about?
Well, some of what we're doing right now is not suitable for students. During the summer, we're going to have some team programming
Cool.
online that's really great. Professional actors and teachers really working through stuff with students. It's going to be called the Triad Stage Academy, and we're going to be doing things online, and then hopefully moving back to in-person eventually, but we'll see, right? Right now, we're about to start a project called Blowing Up the Canon, and it focuses on female identifying writers and people of color from the early times of theater, and exploring works that are not traditionally included in the theatrical canon, and bringing them to light in an effort to have educators and actors and directors really consider those works for future productions. And so I'm collecting directors and actors at the moment. We're recording our first one on Monday, and hopefully it will be out next Tuesday. And that will be a weekly series that we run throughout the summer. And then once our doors open again, we hope to complete the production of Pride and Prejudice that I was working on. But we also hope to have monthly readings of these plays to continue it beyond our shut-in time. Yeah.
Yep. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time,
Thank
and I
you.
really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. It's really lovely to be a part of it.